Hey guys, Mr. Champion here, and we're going to start our new unit on the goals and principles of the Constitution. This is really important as we prepare for our Philadelphia trip and to have some time to actually go to the actual site of where our Constitution was written. Your essential question: what are the goals and the principles of the Constitution? First thing you should do in answering this essential question is be able to explain how the preamble defines the goals of our Constitution. So we're going to look at the preamble. Secondly, describe the framework of our government established by the Constitution, and this is where we're going to get into the articles and what do they outline. And then lastly, you should be able to identify the 7 basic principles of the American government, and we'll talk more about that when we get to that section. So let's go ahead and dive in. Make sure you have your notes in front of you. Fill those notes out. If you have questions as we go along, write those questions down in your questions section of your notes. Our preamble to our Constitution: we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States. We're going to go ahead and dissect this preamble to kind of outline the goals of our Constitution. So our goals, the first one was to form a more perfect union. Basically, this is saying that we decide that we're going to work together. You remember, under the Articles of Confederation, we were loosely united. Here under the Constitution, we're saying we're going to be completely unified. The second goal was to establish justice, all right, a uniform system. If you notice, under the Constitution, now we have a system of courts where we can dispute any disagreements amongst one another as individuals as well as states or various individual groups within our country. To ensure domestic tranquility. This is about peace and order in the homeland. Here we have things such as National Guard. Under the Constitution, we can now raise money for a standing army so that we can have peace within our borders and also to defend and protect ourselves. The fourth goal was to provide for a common defense. Again, this is coming back to protect us from foreign attack. If you remember, under the Articles of Confederation, we can defend ourselves, nor could we access our full trade because individuals such as Spain and British were not allowing us to do so. So under the Constitution, we would provide a common defense, not just for Carolinians or for those in Rhode Island, but for all of those under the United States of America. And the fifth was to promote the general welfare, the well-being of all citizens. And again, it's kind of tricky now when we look at this particular goal, but again, it shows how awesome the framing of our Constitution and the preamble. It's altruism that existed, or it's underneath its goals and beliefs. Despite the things such as slavery, women not being able to vote, it still wanted to promote the well-being of all of its citizens. And then I want to look at securing the blessings of liberty, and basically securing the freedoms that we're going to look at later on when we look at the Bill of Rights that each citizen is allowed. And even as we move forward in our later units and study the Civil War, we'll see how the freedoms for all Americans starts to unfold. Next, let's look at the articles and the amendments to our Constitution. The first, the articles are basically the 7 sections of the framework that are set up for our government, and it kind of outlines the purposes and what our government is supposed to do. Under Articles 1 and 3, it kind of outlines the 3 branches of government. We're going to look at that closely in Section 2, but Articles 1 and 3 kind of outlines the roles and responsibilities of our 3 branches of government. Article 4 is a relationship between states. It discussed how Georgia would relate to Florida, Florida relate to North Carolina, etc. as we go forward in terms of trading, in terms of border rights, etc. Again, we'll look at that in subsequent sections. Article 5 really outlines the amendment process. If you remember, the first 10 amendments we're going to look at later. The Bill of Rights was added to it, again, in order to make it to get it ratified. We had to add to or amend the original Constitution. So Article 5 outlines that. Article 6 talks about the Constitution as a supreme law, that we would abide by it when it gets into treaties and things of that nature that fell under the Constitution at the time. And even present day, we would abide by that it's the supreme law, it's the final law in our country. And then Article 7 sets up the procedure for states to ratify the Constitution. So if you want to have amendments added to it, what is the process? And again, we'll look at specifically what's that process later on. To date, we have 27 formal changes to the Constitution, or that have been instituted. The first 10, as we talked earlier, is the Bill of Rights. Now, there are 7 basic principles to our Constitution, and again, you're filling these notes. If you have any questions about these or any further thoughts, write those down. The first principle is popular sovereignty, the idea we the people. This is kind of revolutionary idea. The people have the right to alter or to abolish their government if the government isn't working for the people, if it's not serving people as designed. This is, again, what makes the Constitution at this time very unique. Other governments was formed through wars or just by default. Here we're saying it's popular sovereignty, or by the people. Second principle is limited government. The government has only the powers that's outlined in the Constitution. Again, the states have their own laws and things in which individuals within that state get to work out and hash out. Third, you have separation of powers, and we talked about the executive, legislative, and the judicial branches that are outlined in that. Again, the checks and balances come into play when you think about separation of powers. And this is saying that each branch has the power to check or limit the actions of the other. And so we'll look more about the president's veto power, how can Congress override the president's vetoes, and how can the Supreme Court uphold the Constitution when laws that are created will go against that of the Constitution. So kind of a checks and balance. That way no one person, as they were fearful in Great Britain, would have power. And so I've given you a chart here to kind of break down the roles and responsibilities and how they can check one another. We'll take a look at this in an activity to follow tomorrow on checks and balances within our legislative, executive, and judicial branches. Our fifth principle is something called federalism, and basically this is a division of powers between the federal government, which is our national government, and the states, so individual states. This is called federalism. Idea that there will be division of powers within it. And so you have governors of a particular state, and then you also would have a president who's the leader of all of the states. So this idea of there's a separation between powers and certain rights held within the federal government and the state government. Sixth principle is something called republicanism, and again, this is part of your vocabulary that you need to make sure you're filling in. We don't have a direct democracy, meaning that when we vote, we don't count the actual votes. We send representatives to Washington, D.C. to execute our vote, and when it comes time to elect individuals. And so we'll talk about that again in further and later sections. And then lastly, this idea of individual rights, that individual rights are protected. First Amendment right, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, press, those kind of things we'll take a look at. But also the individual rights are spelled out in the Bill of Rights, and then those amendments that are added to that. So what I'd like you to do now, if you haven't done so, is to start to fill out your essential question. You want to focus on answering those 3 objective questions that I've given to you at the beginning of the lecture and that are on your notes. When you have done this, written it down on your paper, you'll find a section in Moodle that says Chapter 8, Section 1 Summary. You want to make sure you post that there. If you remember last the section, many of you guys did not post into Moodle, so we want to make sure you do that. Once you're done with that, study your notes. Be prepared for your quiz tomorrow. Thanks, guys. And if you have any questions, remember, write them down.